Ladies and gentlemen, and now it is my immense pleasure to invite you for this year's first conversation with a special guest, Mr. Thomas Greminger, Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. I pass the floor to Dr. Katarzyna Pisarska, the Director of the European Academy of Diplomacy and the Program Director of the Warsaw Security Forum, who will chair this conversation. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It's my immense pleasure today to chair the first conversation with this special guest, a launching conversation for this year's Warsaw Security Forum, which I also hope will set the stage for further discussions at the forum. I'm immensely honored to be welcoming today Mr. Thomas Greminger, who is the Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, but who is also a very experienced Swiss diplomat. He has been the permanent Swiss representative to the OSCE, to the United Nations, and international organizations in Vienna for almost 5 years. But has also been responsible for the Swiss chairmanship in the so vital time for the OSCE in 2004. So when annexation of Crimea happened, when the Donbass war began, so he has been actually observing the development of the organization in those critical years that have actually, I think, shaken the organization. Now I'm asking him about this in just a moment. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe is one of those organizations that we have great hopes for. It was an organization that after the Cold War was to found the very basis of European security architecture. Today it encompasses 57 participating countries from North America, from Western Europe, from Eastern Europe. All the post-Soviet states are members of the organization. It has a very comprehensive security agenda, which includes, among others, the human dimension. Not many organizations think about it, and we have annually a meeting on human dimension here in Warsaw that I know Secretary Greminger actually participated already this year, which we'll also be talking about. So there's a number of subjects. I will have only a few questions to Secretary General of the OSCE, and then I would like to pass the floor to you for the questions from the audience. So we'll be also looking forward to your input. Mr. Secretary General, please join me at the stage. Secretary General, first of all, congratulations on taking on the role of Secretary General of the OSCE. I understand it's been only a few months, but a very busy month since July, and I'm sure you're learning on the job, but knowing the organization very well. And my first question would be pretty simple. You know, as you have actually taken over OSCE, what do you see as the most pressing security challenge for Europe and for your organization as a whole right now?
Well, good morning, Katarzyna. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to this prestigious forum. I'm in month 4 of my new job, and I feel very honored to be here with you this morning. Well, indeed, Europe faces a number, and I would argue, an unprecedented build-up of security challenges. I would perhaps refer to 4. First and foremost, the fundamental principles and commitments that have helped maintain stability in Europe for decades have been violated. This rule-based security order has been put into question, and we have armed conflict again on the continent, and we have this East-West divide that has re-emerged, and that is growing deeper. Second point, and obviously a corollary to the first point, military activities in Europe are again increasing, both in intensity and in scale. And I'm afraid we are again on the brink of a new arms race. We face possible escalation of military incidents due to misunderstandings. And on top of this, we face a range of new threats. Threats that we call transnational, that is terrorism, violent extremism, organized crime, cyber threats, trafficking, drugs, weapons, and people. And then, and this is my fourth category of threats that I would see on the radar. There are emerging global challenges affected by climate change, affected by poverty, demographic pressure, migration, populism. And on top of all these challenges, on top of a common security framework that is under threat, we face a historic deficit in trust among key stakeholders of European security. Now, well, if we are to rebuild security and strengthen stability, we obviously need, again, more dialogue, we need more cooperation, and well, in sum, we need, again, more cooperative security. Now, your question, what can the OSCE do about this? What do we have on offer? Well, the OSCE offers, and that is my first point, a whole range of tools to prevent conflict. One of the most important tools is its Center of Competence for Promoting Human Rights and Democracy, ODI, sitting here in Warsaw. We have a High Commission on National Minority that does silent diplomatic work. We have the Conflict Prevention Center in my city area in Vienna. To name just a few of these tools that operate often below the political radar screen, but that do enormously important work. I should also refer to the 16 field missions that the OSCE operates in the Western Balkans, in well, a bit less so today in the Caucasus and in Central Asia. Then, well, I would, of course, mention our role as conflict manager. We offer mediation and facilitation services to crisis and conflict in Europe. You mentioned the Ukraine crisis. There are a number of protracted conflicts where the OSCE plays different roles, but always as a mediation and facilitation. We work on the transnational threats. We offer expertise to participating states in terms of fighting terrorism, fighting trafficking, border management. The OSCE is the first organization that has come up with, meanwhile, 3 sets of confidence building measures on cybersecurity. So I guess the OSCE is very active on these issues. And last but not least, we are also the inclusive platform for dialogue and hopefully also again more joint action in terms of political military matters. And here I would briefly want to refer to what we call structured dialogue. This is a process that has been launched last December by the Hamburg Ministerial Council. And it's an informal process involving diplomats, experts from capitals and from Vienna that work on issues of military risk reduction, confidence and security building measures, and arms control. And this has been a process that really managed to again establish a genuine dialogue on these very difficult issues, and is also about to produce first concrete outcomes.
Okay, that was an easy question. And you gave us a shopping list of all the security challenges that we face, not only in Europe, but globally. And one thing that you said is of critical importance, that we have seen a deterioration of trust between key stakeholders of the security process. And it's not only on the political level, we see that among business, we see that among societies, within societies and within institutions. And I think this trust issue is key. So I imagine that having so many different members within OSCE, and some of them, as we know, very actively trying to undermine the organization's role, especially in human rights and the human dimension of its activities. How do you deal with so many different stakeholders, again, with some of them not necessarily sharing the organization's main values and agenda?
Well, having 57 participating states around the table is, of course, at the same time a huge challenge. And I mean, I fully agree, it is unfortunately not anymore like in the early 90s when we had this convergence of values and when we felt that the OSCE would become a common value-based organization. I recall this concept of a security community in the Euro-Atlantic Eurasian area that was still laid out as a vision at the Astana summit in 2010. I think we are far away from that. At the same time, OSCE's inclusiveness is also its huge asset. You have the opportunity to have an eye-to-eye discussion with all stakeholders in European security, including the Russian Federation. And I think that is at the same time a challenge, but also that's our unique selling proposition.
Let's move on to what the OSCE actually found as a very important part of its work, so monitoring also conflicts. And you have recently traveled to Ukraine to inspect the OSCE monitoring mission there. And could you share with us your impressions from the visit, from what the Ukrainian side is doing, what is happening in Donbass? How are you monitoring the activities on the Russian-Ukrainian border? And what have you brought from this visit? Of course, knowing the conflict very well and having been there before during the presidency, Swiss presidency already, what has changed? And what do you think we should be expecting in the months and years maybe to come? Maybe nothing.
Well, that's a very comprehensive question. Well, of course, let me start by saying it was, of course, for me a very exciting experience to go back to Ukraine. You alluded to my chairing of the Permanent Council in 2014, so I negotiated the mandate of the Special Monitoring Mission in 2014, and in a way it was rewarding to see, but also very sobering to see my baby grown up. The Special Monitoring.
Has it grown up?
Well, I mean, it is now an operation of more than 1,000 staff. It has become by far the OSCE's biggest operation. I think it does an enormously important work. It has so far succeeded in preventing further escalation of the conflict, and I think it's really to be acknowledged. SMF works in a very hostile, in a very vulnerable and often hostile environment, and I think by and large they do a fantastic job, and I was really impressed by what SMF does under these circumstances. What I also assess very positively is the support SNM gets from the Ukrainian authorities. I met with President Poroshenko, I met with Foreign Minister Klimkin, and it was unequivocal, it was 100% clear Ukrainian authorities support SNM. This was slightly different from
okay.
I worked with SNM in its early days. Now today, Ukraine fully supports SNM, and the same, by the way, goes for the Russian Federation. I was just in Moscow last Friday, had a very long and productive conversation with Minister Lavrov, saying 100% support. And that is, of course, absolutely fundamental for the impact of SNM, but also for the safety of the monitors. That's the positive side of the picture. Now comes the negative. When you look at the security situation on the ground, unfortunately, there hasn't been much improvement. There is a constant pattern of a recommitment to a ceasefire, and then we have a few weeks of ceasefire violations going down, of relative calm, but then it all starts again. And we've just been witnessing this as we speak. You had this back-to-school ceasefire on the 26th of August. For a few weeks, things looked pretty good. But now what we face right now is again a spike of ceasefire violations. We have again lots of heavy weaponry near the line of contact. And of course, this bears a huge risk of escalation. We have still a lot of freedom of movement limitations to SNM monitors, so this is also a problem that persists. And then, of course, now on the political arena, of course, I think we are facing a total impasse when it comes to implementing the Minsk agreements. There is an ongoing discussion among the Normandy 4 on the roadmap, on the Steinmeier formula. For the time being, everything seems to be stuck, and that is, of course, worrying, because in a way, the OSCE, we find ourselves in between. OSCE's Trilateral Contact Group, the only negotiation platform on the ground, tries hard to advance things in terms of political issues, in terms of security, in terms of economic and humanitarian affairs. But basically, if there is no political impulse from the political level, that is basically by the sides or by Normandy 4, the margin of maneuver of the Trilateral Contact Group is extremely limited.
Before I yield the floor to our audience for questions, just one last question also about the Ukrainian conflict. Where do you see this going forward? You say we're in an impasse. You say we're pretty much in a situation where you don't see any big developments happening anytime soon. I mean, what are your predictions for this conflict, and what would have to happen for it to be permanently resolved?
Well, I mean, I think the only show in town is the Minsk agreements. They need to be implemented. Now, if you look at the Minsk agreements, you realize you have a set of security-related clauses, and you have a set of political clauses. And as long as the sides argue about what is first, we will not advance. I think the trick about the Minsk agreements is that there needs to be a closely synchronized progress on both sets of clauses. And this is why there are these negotiations on the roadmap. And I think there we need progress, there we need a political impulse. Now, as you know, there is an ongoing debate on a possible UN peacekeeping operation. I'm not sure if this is distracting from the real issues, and that is Minsk agreement implementation, or if it is about to bring that political impulse that we need in order to get out of the impasse.
I'm sorry, I have to ask one maybe very naive question, but it has been really going around my mind for some time. When you speak to the both sides that have signed the Minsk agreement, Russia and Ukraine, are the rebels at all part of those discussions, or is Russia the official representative of the other side of the conflict?
Well, I think you know the architecture of the process. You have basically on the political level, it's the Normandy group that basically defines, gives political guidance, and the composition is Germany, France, Ukraine, and the Russian Federation. But then on the level of the Minsk process, you have the trilateral contact group, and there you have DPR and NPR represented.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is yours to any questions you might have for the Secretary General. And there are microphones, so just please raise your hand. We have a first question here and a second question there. We'll start. Please introduce yourself, and if possible, let's keep the questions short.
Maxim Kirkova is European Security Research Initiative Foundation based in Kyiv. And my question is short about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now there are much talks about possible UN peacekeeping mission for Ukraine. And here I have two questions. Doesn't mean that OSCE proved itself to be not able to settle the conflict between Russia and Ukraine? And do you see any need or any prospects to reform in the OSCE to make it more capable to be able to settle conflicts in Europe itself? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll take a second question in the third row. The gentleman in the third row.
Thank you very much. I'm a member of Parliament from Greece. I would like a few thoughts of the Secretary General to hear about the new kind of perhaps threat that Europe faces, which is the secessionist movement. So we've seen Catalonia, we've seen the referendum in Scotland, perhaps we'll see other areas as well. So what are your thoughts on how this will develop and the role of voice in this country?
Thank you very much. So, Secretary General, two questions. How can the OSCE become more relevant also in this aspect of the conflict in Donbass? And second, the secessionist, a new security worry for all of us in the recent months.
Well, I think we need to be clear about one thing. The OSCE will always remain a tool of soft security. We will never have sticks. We may have some carrots, but not too many carrots either. So what the OSCE can offer and will offer in the future is, again, this unique, inclusive platform for dialogue, potentially joint action. We can offer expertise. We can invite participating states to exchange best practices. But it will never be, the OSCE will never be NATO. I mean, you have, when you face today's security challenges, I think you need to come up with a mix of security responses. On the one side, it's certainly the deterrence part. I mean, I wouldn't negate that at all, but I'm standing for the soft side for the dialogue part of security policy responses. Yes, the OSCE needs to be strengthened. We need institutional improvements. We need more resources and this needs to be done, and I'm working together with my secretariat, with championship, with participating states in view of these reforms. But at the same time, I'm convinced that you're not gonna, and you don't need to fundamentally change this organization. And when you address the conflict, again, the OSCE is a mediation or facilitation service provider, but it is always the sides that need to be ready to resolve a conflict. No international organization, as strong as it be, can resolve a conflict. This is an issue of the political will of the sides. I'm not quite sure what the question related to the UN PKO was. I mean, the fact is that we have two proposals on the table. One is formally on the table, another one is politically around, and there is a huge gap between the two proposals. There are important people working on closing this gap. I'm not going to speculate if this is possible and when will it be possible, but I mean, it is, I think, feasible in theory to come up with a concept for a multi-dimensional peace operation in which the UN would assume certain roles and in which the OSCE would assume certain roles. And I would suppose that the OSCE would mainly then focus on all the civilian roles in such a multi-dimensional operation. The question on secessionist movements is a tricky one for the OSCE, because the OSCE is a governmental organization that can basically only act on invitation by governments. So,
are you expecting the Spanish government to invite you?
Well, look, of course, we've been following the Catalonian issue very closely. We've been very concerned by the issue, and basically we have means of public and we have means of silent diplomacy on the offer. And here, in this case, we went for the measures of silent diplomacy.
Thank you very much. Further questions to Secretary General? Welcome very much. There's a lady in the back, so please.
I'm from Romania, Ukraine here. So my question would be about peacekeepers in the past. Talking about that and about peacekeepers. What would be, according to you, the practical future of these talks of peacekeepers in the past?
Well, yes. I think one thing is clear. At the end, it is about implementing the Minsk agreements. Now, possibly a peace operation can support the process of implementation, can particularly add value when it comes to implementing the security-related clauses of the Minsk agreement. But at the end of the day, again, it's about synchronizing the security-related and the political dimensions of Minsk. And this, by agreeing to a peace operation, will not automatically be resolved. So basically, the discussions that you currently have on the roadmap, I think they will need to be concluded, because if they are not concluded, then you will have the very same discussions, just in another format.
Thank you. And we have still time for two more questions. There's a lady there, please, at the very end.
Great to be Ukraine. I want to ask you about the OSCE monitoring mission in Donbass. You mentioned that observers are faced with restrictions on freedom of movement, and we know that they still don't have access to the border, Ukrainian and Russian. And your organization calls on Russia, and Kiev officials calls on Russia, but we see the situation doesn't change, and it lasts for months and even for years already. So do you see some steps, some other forms of influence, so that they finally could gain this access?
We have a lot of good friends from Ukraine, as you see, and the conflict there is of critical importance. So one more question, the last question about Donbass, about the border, that is so critical for the Ukrainian state, the control over the border, and I understand the OSCE does not have access to that border. What can you do about that?
Well, I mean, these freedom of movement restrictions that SML faces are, of course, extremely frustrating. And we are, on a daily basis, we are calling on different levels on the sides to lift these limitations. Here again, there is a pattern. For a while, things go a bit better, and then we are again back to a high number of restrictions. I think there are limits to what you can do on basically the basis of a daily dialogue. Again, if you read the Minsk agreements attentively, then you see that access to the border is the last stage of the process. And so you should probably not be surprised that it is very difficult to exceed the border under current circumstances. So my answer would again be, let's implement the Minsk agreement and then we'll be getting there.
Thank you. I would want to ask you, working with 57 participating states, from our discussion it's clear that there's so much divergence on such a big number of issues. But can you tell me some areas where actually everybody's on the same page?
Yeah, I think the more obvious areas for cooperation, for progress, are the transnational threats. And that is counterterrorism, preventing violent extremism, trafficking is an area, cybersecurity.
Nuclear dissemination? Nuclear dissemination initiative?
That's not a specialty of, I mean, the OSCE helps participating states to implement UN Security Resolution 1540, but as such, we do not have a specific nuclear expertise. But again, on 1540, we are working actively in the field of capacity building of participating states. And then again, that works fairly well. So the transnational threats, I think, is an area. But again, and I come back to my initial points, I think we also need to aim at incremental progress, and I insist on incremental progress in rebuilding trust and confidence when it comes to the political military field.
So if you were to move 10 years from now, you will no longer be Secretary General. Who knows, maybe you will.
I don't think so.
But regardless whether you will be or not, where would you want the organization to be?
Well,
would you want to go back to the 1990s? Is that a goal, or should we already be looking at a completely different security architecture as such?
Well, I think what I would wish that in 10 years' time we would have come back to a strong recommitment to the principles on commitments of a rule-based European security order, that we would have reached again a common understanding. I mean, it's interesting, you know, nobody questions the principles and commitments as such, but what we witness today is we have totally different understandings of what these principles mean and imply. And I would hope that in 10 years' time we would have again reached a common understanding, that in 10 years' time we would have again reached, or at least working seriously on re-establishing an arms control regime, that we would have modernized the Vienna document, again having an up-to-date system of competence and security building measures. That would be my vision, at least now, for the politico-military area.
I'm happy that you actually mentioned this issue of a different understanding of certain principles. I think this is today very crucial. We had an impression in the 1990s that with the final demise of the Soviet Union, a certain set of values and principles have actually dominated the world, if not the world, then at least the West and Europe. We saw Russia becoming a member of the Council of Europe. We saw exactly the development of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe as a very important, also principle-based community of values. But the last years have saw a complete destruction of many of those consensus-based platforms. We see this not only with the OSCE, we also see it also in the Council of Europe. Later in the day, and I invite you very warmly to this panel, we have a separate session chaired by Tom Garrett from the Community of Democracies, only on how security relates to democracy. How is it important to actually respect human rights, respect the rule of law, respect democratic principles in order for us to be able to assure security for our citizens and for the regions. When you look at what is happening with the understanding of these principles, how do you explain this phenomena? What has happened really over the past years that we began such diverging views, and we cannot agree? Well, we agree on the principles, we just interpret them completely differently, and the notion of sovereignty comes in very strongly, the notion of nation-state comes back very strongly. What happened, in your opinion, as you watch, coming from Switzerland, probably one of the most democratic countries, known for its multiple referendums every week and every month?
But what is striking is that we have totally different, totally diverging narratives of why we have come to the point of where we are today. And of course, if you talk to Russian security politicians, well, they would criticize the West for having broken the rules of this security order. So I think what is striking is that there are totally different logics, and I think gradually we will have to manage to overcome these different narratives and logics. I would encourage you to study the conclusions of this panel of eminent persons that has been working from 2014 on, trying to work under the title of European Security as a Common Project, and basically trying to come up with recommendations how can you get out of this current impasse that you have just described. And basically what they came up with was the three different narratives of why is it that we are where we are right now.
I'll be happy to read it. Ladies and gentlemen, a last question that we can take. Please.
I'm Kim Peterson. I'm the Danish defense attaché here in Warsaw and in Kiev. My military mind, when I listen to this, is always looking at command and control. control, to get it in boxes, to get it simple. If I was in your shoes, sir, working with those challenges we have apparently also in Ukraine, with a lot of stakeholders, your organization, we have NATO, we have UN, we have EU, and we have many other stakeholders there. So command and control, do you have any coordination forum with these organizations I just mentioned in order to facilitate in line the way we try to reform Ukraine in order to avoid any duplications? Do you meet regularly in order to do so?
Well, there are coordination platforms on different levels. There are platforms when it comes to the work in the Donbass, but there are also on a more national level. But to tell you the truth, I'm in Vienna, sitting in Vienna, I'm too far from really being able to assess how effective these platforms are. But I mean, at least on paper, they exist.
Thank you very much. Secretary General, my last question. If there was one message you would want everybody to leave from this room today, what would that be?
Well, use the dialogue tools of the OEC, also when it comes to political military matters.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big round of applause to our guest secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move into the break, let me also take the advantage of the fact that not only do I have the microphone, but also the fact that I've had the huge privilege to be the program director of this year's Warsaw Security Forum. And I think this is a great occasion to tell you just a few of the most important highlights of what we are expecting in the next 2 days, and encourage you to participate in the many events that are coming up. So first of all, as you've probably noticed from the programs, we have divided the sessions into 3 types of sessions: global outlook, security, and defense outlook. Of course, they were intertwined in many issues, but the global outlook will look at the major global problems that we're dealing that have major impact on security, not only of Europe, but of the world's security. In the track called security, we'll be focusing more on issues related to specific problems. We'll talk about energy security, economic security, we'll talk about cyber security, but also issues such as, for example, disinformation. How is information warfare impacting our country's security? And finally, the defense track, of which I have to say I know the least of, but there's so many good experts here. We'll talk actually about the biggest defense challenges, including challenges for not only NATO, but our militaries and our defense industries in the future. We'll talk about procurement, we'll talk about Navy, the Air Forces, specifically in the region. So I'm sure that with the variety of stakeholders we have, you'll find each of you something important and something valuable for your expertise. We have a number of announcements coming up, and you will see that throughout the program. Many memorandums, industrial memorandums, but also institutional memorandums are to be formed during these 2 days. But one is especially close to my heart. I'm very proud to say and invite you warmly tomorrow in the afternoon at 2:30 for the signing of the Women in International Security Charter in Poland. Women in International Security is a global organization based in Washington, D.C. that has numerous chapters around the world, but has not had one in Poland. We feel that women's voices need to be heard much more strongly within the security issues. The panel that will follow that announcement is about women in violent conflicts. We'll try to look why women are the first victim of violent conflicts and have the least to say in those conflicts. I'm also happy to say, as I mentioned before, that we've added a critical component of actually a more values-based approach and starting to define what really the security of NATO and EU is, namely the principle-based approach. We'll have a session with the Brookings Institute and the Community of Democracies on democracy versus security, a false dilemma as we see it, and we will have there also a number of stakeholders from civil society contributing to the debate that is so often dominated by defense and these hard security issues. And of course, last but not least, I want to remind you that among of you are the new security leaders. They have beautiful green badges. I see one of our friends just sitting in front of there. These are the future ministers of foreign affairs and defense. Actually, some of them are already deputy ministers. So please be kind to them. You never know where they will find themselves in a few years. And take your time also to discuss what they're doing currently as the new generation of security leaders. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's a huge pleasure on behalf of myself and my husband Zbigniew to be hosting you here today. I hope you had fun also. I hope you'll have forged a lot of good partnerships, but also some friendships as well. And if you need anything from us, we are here to serve you over the next 2 days. And please enjoy the networking break. We meet here in half an hour, 30 minutes, for the first session about relaunching the European Union project with a number of great speakers. So I hope to see you there in just half a minute. Thank you very much and have a nice break.